On Friday last week, Reuters reported that the US Pentagon had circulated an internal email exploring ways to punish European countries for their refusal to join Trump's war on Iran. Among other things, the note, by top Pentagon advisor Elbridge Colby, reportedly suggested suspending Spain from NATO and reviewing the US's position on the UK's claim to the Falkland Islands. It also follows reports from last month that Trump was considering withdrawing the US from NATO, or pulling American troops out of Europe, with Trump telling Reuters, "Wouldn't you if you were me?" So, in this video, we'll explain the ongoing US-Europe tensions, and why a US military withdrawal from Europe looks increasingly likely. If you love staying informed and want some of the best reporting on YouTube, then subscribe and ring the bell for more. Let's start with the US's military presence in Europe. Since the end of the Second World War, the US has stationed tens of thousands of troops in Europe across dozens of bases, with the largest share, 35,000 US personnel, in Germany. In fact, southwestern Germany's Ramstein Air Base is the primary US Air Force base in Europe, hosting over 16,000 personnel, and is also a key control centre for drone operations, having played a central role in the US's war on terror. However, Trump's return to the presidency in January 2025 has increased fears about a possible US military withdrawal from Europe. The Trump administration suspended military aid to Ukraine within weeks of taking office, has repeatedly suggested its commitment to NATO's Article 5 Mutual Defence Clause is conditional on European defence spending, hence why NATO members agreed to increase their defence spending target to 5% of GDP at last June's NATO summit, and even held a bilateral summit with Russia without a European or Ukrainian presence. Things then took a turn for the worse in early 2026, when Trump suddenly began saying he needed Greenland, a semi-autonomous Arctic territory belonging to fellow NATO member Denmark, with the White House even suggesting using the military was, quote, always an option. This sparked an unprecedented crisis in NATO, as the US, a founding member and NATO's biggest military contributor, was directly threatening to attack a fellow member. Moreover, Trump also scoffed at NATO in a Truth Social post, writing, "I doubt NATO would be there for us if we really needed them," despite the fact that the only time NATO's Article 5 Mutual Defence Clause has ever been invoked was by the US after 9/11. Anyway, this has all led to growing expectations that Trump may soon withdraw US troops from European bases, an idea he publicly floated last month, thereby leaving Europe less defended and more exposed. On Friday last week, a Reuters report stated that an internal Pentagon email containing a note from Elbridge Colby, one of the Trump administration's top defense officials, had suggested kicking Spain out of NATO and reviewing the US's policy towards the Falkland Islands, which are controlled by the British but claimed by Argentina, in order to punish Spain and the UK for not allowing US bases on their territories to be used for offensive action against Iran. The Pentagon official who spoke to Reuters also declined to say whether the email also mentioned a withdrawal of US forces from Europe, although this is now looking increasingly likely. So with that, we see at least three reasons why a US military withdrawal from Europe looks increasingly likely. First, current US-Europe tensions. Second, Trump's desire to subordinate Europe and make it look weak. And third, Trump's history of withdrawing from international organisations. So let's start with the first reason, ongoing US-Europe tensions. As we mentioned earlier, European governments have been reluctant to join Trump's war on Iran, with Spain and Italy denying the US permission to use bases on their territories to attack Iran, and the UK initially refusing permission, before then allowing the US access only to strike Iranian sites being used to attack other targets. This infuriated Trump, who, in a Truth Social rant in early April, repeated his false claim that NATO wasn't there when we needed them, rather ominously adding, "Remember Greenland, that big poorly run piece of ice." Then a flurry of other reports came out saying Trump was openly considering ways to punish allies for their refusal to join his war on Iran, including withdrawing US troops from Europe or leaving NATO entirely. The second reason a US military withdrawal looks more likely is that Trump may try a new tactic, abandonment, to make the US look strong and Europe look weak. In February 2025, a report by the EU's Institute for Security Studies asked the question, what could US abandonment of Europe look like? And offered two different analyses. Either a tit-for-tat scenario where Trump uses the threat of abandonment to push Europe into spending more on defence, as happened last year, or actual abandonment, which would see US military assets moved from Europe to other areas, like the Americas or the Indo-Pacific. However, we think a third scenario is also possible, where Trump partially or symbolically abandons Europe to try and create a sort of victory narrative. Given that Europe remains several years away from being able to fill any security vacancy left by the US, if Trump pulled out American forces and Europe panicked and begged for them back, Trump could frame it as a win for US dominance and portray Europe as subordinate. The fact that Trump's war on Iran is clearly not going well and is further dragging down his approval ratings means he's likely seeking a quick victory, or at least another distraction of some sort. The third and most obvious sign of a planned US withdrawal from Europe is simply that the Trump administration won't stop talking about it. Despite NATO members agreeing to massively ramp up defence spending last year, Trump continues to float the idea of leaving NATO, with European analysts and leaders now seemingly expecting a formal withdrawal. While a formal withdrawal technically requires a 2/3 Senate majority vote or an act of Congress, it's unclear whether this could stop Trump, because of the constitutional authority the president has over foreign policy. It's also worth noting that, during his first term, Trump pulled the US out of a handful of major international agreements, like the Paris Climate Agreement, UN Human Rights Council, UNESCO, and the World Health Organization. But this term has withdrawn from 66, including 31 UN bodies. This is way more than Trump did in his first term, and it's reasonable to think NATO could be the next big organisation Trump's planning to leave. Moreover, according to a Reuters report published in December, the US has set a deadline of 2027 for a European-led NATO, which is clearly laying the groundwork for an eventual US withdrawal. Ultimately, while some analysts and Trump supporters have argued that this is good policy, or part of some kind of 5D chess by Trump in order to get Europe to take responsibility for its own defence, it seems more likely that Trump would use a US military withdrawal primarily to humiliate Europe. It's entirely plausible that Trump will actually pull US forces out of Europe at some point soon, as it's unclear how publicly threatening military action against European NATO members or speedrunning the internal collapse of the alliance will make it stronger or more stable. So you're probably wondering what's next for this story, and how it's going to develop over the coming days and weeks. But it might be overwhelming trying to sift through the thousands of news articles trying to find one that you can trust not to feed you a false narrative. Luckily, we have a simple solution for you, and that solution is Ground News. You've probably heard us talk about Ground News before, the app and website that shows how the same story is covered across the political spectrum. But now more than ever, we need Ground News to truly understand what's really going on in the world around us. It's difficult finding trustworthy news sources, so Ground News will do the hard work for you, compiling thousands of articles and putting them in one easy-to-access place. Each article comes with a breakdown into bias distribution, factuality, and ownership of each individual source. For instance, if we take this story on Trump considering withdrawing from NATO, we can easily see that 470 sources are currently reporting on it, with most of the coverage coming from the centre. Looking at the headlines, we can dive deeper to understand the differences in reporting on each side, with the left focusing on the crisis now facing NATO, and the right calling NATO foolish and a paper tiger. Our absolute favourite feature though is their blind spot feed. Here you can see all the stories you might not have seen on your usual feed, so even if you don't agree with the reporting, it's good to step out of your bubble. And it's not just us that feels this way. The Nobel Peace Centre also proudly endorses Ground News, calling it an excellent way to stay informed, avoid echo chambers, and expand your worldview. So, if you want to start questioning the narrative, you can join Ground News today. And using our link, you'll get 40% off their unlimited access Vantage plan. All you have to do is subscribe through the link in the description. Go to ground.news/TLDR or scan the QR code on screen, and you'll be supporting an independent news platform working to make the media landscape more transparent.